third parties a fatal risk to our democracy? Well, that's what Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe tweeted yesterday in response to conjecture that a third-party candidate could force a second Trump term.
Meanwhile, over on CNN, Anderson Cooper and Green Party hopeful Cornel West clashed when West brought up the over 500,000 Iraqis killed during the U.S. invasion. Let's watch.
The world didn't come to the rescue of Grozny. He did exactly what he wanted to do. I mean, unchecked, he will slaughter people.
Well, I mean, unchecked, he will slaughter folk. Unchecked, what we did in Iraq was slaughtering people. Unchecked, what we've done in other places. Unchecked,
but sir,
variety
Dr.
of
West,
other empires
Dr.
do
West,
that. Nation states do that, though.
No, I understand.
They're wrong. And when they're wrong, you have to pull up. You have to point it out.
Look, I respect you. You know, I love you. But I do think it's inappropriate to compare the Russian bombing of Grozny and what we witnessed there with the war in Iraq. I mean, to say that innocents are killed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the horrible things happen.
Half a million Iraqis killed, my brother.
Well,
500,000.
Yeah, listen, I was there. I mean, I was there. I was there with troops. I certainly understand. I also saw a lot of Americans getting killed, and I saw, you know, the horrors of Saddam Hussein. I'm just saying I don't think it's accurate to compare the pummeling of a city by Russian artillery with civilians inside, pummeling every single day with the intention of just destroying and flattening a city, with actions the U.S. took.
Later, Cooper hosted James Carville to discuss Cornel West's candidacy. Let's also play some of that.
He's obviously an accomplished scholar, academic. He seems to be a very charming man. And he's also a menace to the threat of the continued constitutional order in the United States. And I say that because look what Ralph Nader was directly responsible for the election of George W. Bush, which brought about this horrific Iraq war and this horrific economic downturn we had, among other things. Jill Stein, who's his campaign manager, is almost certainly an agent of the Russian government. If you don't believe me, somebody at home Google photo General Flynn, Vladimir Putin, Jill Stein. She was hosted by the Russians prior to her run-in in 2016.
So firing government employees was fascism in a different segment we talked about. Now having third parties, fascism.
Yeah, so many leftists pointed out, as Cornel West did accurately there, that we're talking about 500,000 dead Iraqis compared to 5,000 to 8,000 people that were killed in the bombing.
We had good intentions. Why are you going to get on their case about it? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Really think about what Anderson Cooper is trying to do there. He's trying to shame Cornel West out of making an appropriate comparison between the imperialist acts of the United States and Russia, saying that both are bad, not comparing them in a kind of whataboutism to absolve Russia of responsibility, but for us to force the audience to contend with America's own war crimes. And what Anderson Cooper is doing is trying to say, well, you can't compare what we did in Iraq with what Russia did in Chechnya. Because why? Many orders of magnitude of people were killed by us in Iraq than were in Chechnya by Russia. But you can hear the American exceptionalism tumbling out of Anderson Cooper's mouth as he feels the need to say, well, I saw a lot of Americans die in Iraq too. Was it 500,000 Americans? I mean, it's not to minimize
who sent them there? We shouldn't have sent them there. Right, it's not minimizing the deaths at all. It was wrong to send them there. It was done by a neoconservative ideology that at the time was transcended in both political parties, that the American people were, I think, at their most point of agreement with, were skeptical of at best. And Donald Trump said that same thing in that famous interview, my favorite Donald Trump quote. He said, when he was at, well, Putin's a killer, and he said, a lot of killers, Bill. I think we're so innocent. And people appreciate the honesty about that. The troops themselves. I always bring this up. Ron Paul, who from a foreign policy standpoint, I think was Trump before Trump. A lot of differences between them on policy and delivery and everything, but was making the case in 2008 that these were wars of aggression, Iraq and Afghanistan, that were unconstitutional, that were immoral, that were wrong. And then Rudy Giuliani type people will say, well, you hate the troops, you're a fifth column or something. And he'd say, actually, more troops support me than any other Republican in this race because they've been there. They see that we're throwing their lives away for nothing. They don't support this. They know this is not a good idea.
Yeah, I remember Barack Obama was able to make similar arguments about troop support, and Bernie Sanders was the most supported by service members, former service members back in the last couple of cycles. But this raises an interesting question, I think, because there has been an ongoing debate on the left about the utility of Cornel West running as a third-party candidate. And some people have argued that he will not get as much attention because he's not a participant in the primary. He is going to have to contend with these spoiler accusations. And certainly the second part of that is very, very true. But when I see how galvanized the public is around moments like this, it seems like he's benefiting from that factor that RFK Jr. has, where he's seen as being so openly adversarial to and strategically dangerous to the interests of the Democratic Party, not to the democracy, but to the victory aspects of the Democratic Party, that people are focusing on him with negative press, but negative press which is giving him a boost in attention in a way that might not be the case if he was perceived as running a vanity campaign or a symbolic campaign purely within the context of a Democratic primary where he would be ranking third or fourth in the cohort. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, it seems to me as time goes on, I am increasingly supportive of, or I think strategically it's an increasingly good idea for him to have chosen to run outside of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, for sure. And it's always worth pointing out that this idea that the third parties are always spoilers should be treated with deep suspicion. A lot of people who are voting for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or someone else, those votes would not have automatically accrued. A chunk of those votes would have gone to Republicans. A chunk of those votes would have gone to Democrats, at least in the Libertarian Party case. Probably not too many of the Green Party votes going to Republicans, but probably the biggest chunk of them just wouldn't have voted at all.
Yes.
They would have wrote in Jill Stein's name or someone else.
Yes.
This idea that either of the parties is owed or likely to get a substantial number of votes for some other candidate is just based on nothing. It's just not true.
It's not true. And as many people have pointed out, more registered Democrats in Florida in 2000 voted for George Bush than voted for Ralph Nader. So if you're concerned about who owes whose votes, it's not these Green Party voters. It's Democrats who chose to vote for the Republican candidate.
Isn't Carville's a big Clinton guy, right?
Yes.
Clinton's original victory, you can argue, is due. There's more of an obvious component of the third party effect there, right? They're all benefits of the Ross Perot campaign for presidency.
Absolutely.
So why are you getting in and just yelling about third party voters now?
That's such an important point. Libertarian candidates always do so much better than the Green Party candidates and pull. If we're going to play the game where every Libertarian candidate voter would have voted for a Republican and every Green Party candidate would have voted for the Democrat, well, then you got to revise all those tallies that they throw up on MSNBC all the time that show
Green
that
Party,
Jill Stein's vote margin was bigger than what Hillary Clinton lost by. Okay, well, you're also going to include all the Libertarian votes that ostensibly would have gone to Donald Trump in that exact same race. They never do. And I do think that there's a certain way that Cornel West is able to heighten those kinds of contrasts and also potentially make the case for ranked choice voting by running as a third-party candidate in a way that will have much longer-term benefits for insurgent movements in the United States of America that hope to break up the corporate duopoly. Yeah,
ultimately that is the answer. That would be the best way to neutralize this concern, is a ranked choice voting system, and that way then the spoiler idea would stop being an issue. That if your Jill Stein or Cornel West candidate doesn't win, or your Joe Jorgensen or Gary Johnson candidate doesn't win, then you can indicate that you want your vote to descend to someone, to devolve to someone else. If you're interested in doing that, I think a lot of people voting for those parties would not do that because they don't find those candidates, the Hillary Clintons and Donald Trumps and Joe Bidens, acceptable. There are major policy differences with them, and they're not trying really to win the votes of Libertarian and Green Party people. They're not speaking to those issues, as we point out on a daily basis.
And we should also, just before we wrap, point out that James Carville calling Jill Stein a Russian plant without evidence is an interesting kind of misinformation that is permissible on the mainstream television with no pushback.
Right, he's not called
at all.
He's not called a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, notice where there's no fact check on his statement that was a conspiracy theorist misinformation there. That's just kind of allowed to be said.
Yep.
Because no one gets called out by the mainstream for accusing people of having Russian ties or being motivated by Russian interests or foreign interests in general. They just accept, the mainstream just lets those go because we're just going to presume they're all true, even though they've been debunked and problematized 1,000 times over.
Right.
More Rising right after this.